But just a summary, okay? So, like for this one, these are the common terms that you could possibly encounter while solving problems. So, like for number 1, sabi dyan, FOB shipping point, freight collect. Balikan natin when we say FOB shipping point, si buyer na yung liable sa product while the product still in transit. Then, freight collect, sino yung nagbayad? Si buyer. Siya yung nagbayad ng transportation cost. So, meaning, para sa first column natin, expense and liability. So, dito, since si FOB shipping point, si buyer and liable, meron ang i-record natin freight in. Siya ba yung nagbayad? So, since siya yung nagbayad, freight collect, magkikredit tayo ng cash. Siya yung nagbayad, diba? Kung sino yung nagbayad, dapat siya yung magkikredit ng cash. So, dito ang entry natin, debit, freight in, credit, cash. Naintindihan niyo ako? So, ayan, ano effect niyan sa natin, sa financial statements natin. So, dito, sa accounts payable, wala tayong accounts payable with the seller. Kasi, tayo yung nagbayad, tayo din yung dapat magbayad. So, no effect. Sa accounts receivable, wala din tayong receivable with the seller. Kasi tayo yung dapat na magbayad, tayo din yung nagbayad. Nako ha? For letter or number 2, FOB shipping point free prepaid. O, liability na kanino ulit? Kay buyer kasi FOB shipping point. Freight prepaid. Who actually paid? Si seller kasi prepaid. So, since si seller yung nagbayad, na kanino yung cash? Sino yung mababawasan ng cash? Si seller. Okay? So, dito, since si seller ang nagbayad ng cash, ng transportation para sa'yo, may payable ka kay seller. And may receivable naman sa'yo si seller. Kasi ikaw dapat yung magbayad eh. But on your entry, so mangyayari, on your entry, since ikaw yung liable, may freight in. Diba? So, debit freight in, credit cash ba? Hindi ka magkikredit ng cash kasi hindi naman ikaw yung nagbayad. Ang ikikredit mo, accounts payable. Okay? Then, para sa entry naman ni seller, since siya yung unang nagbayad, ang gagawin natin, hindi tayo magde-debit ng freight out kasi hindi naman siya yung liable. Ang ide-debit natin, accounts receivable kasi may dapat siyang singilin kay buyer kasi siya yung nagbayad ng transportation cost na para dapat kay buyer. Okay? Para kay seller, maging entry debit accounts receivable, credit cash since the seller paid the transportation cost. So, ang effect niyan sa accounts natin, sa accounts payable, mag-i-increase. I-increase yung payable ni buyer kay seller. Kay seller naman, mag-i-increase ang kanyang accounts receivable kay buyer. Okay? Para naman sa number 3, FOB destination, freight collect. So, sinabi dyan, FOB destination. So, while in transit, si seller pa rin yung owner ng product. Since siya yung owner ng product, siya yung magbabayad ng transportation cost. Again, nabanggit ko, 'di ba? Yung freight out, it is an expense. So, meaning, under the record of seller, meron siyang freight out. Freight collect, sino nagbayad? Si buyer. Kung si buyer ang nagbayad, meaning, may payable si seller kay buyer. O, pwedeng gawin na lang natin, bawasan na lang yung payable ni buyer kay seller. Okay, parang offsetting lang. So, dito, ang magiging entry natin for seller, since siya yung nagbayad ng transportation charge, expense sa point of view ni seller, yun na, seller. So, magiging entry ni seller, debit, freight out, credit, cash ba? Hindi tayo magkikredit ng cash kasi freight collect si buyer yung nagbayad. So, magkikredit tayo ng accounts payable kay seller. Pwede ba yan, sir? Siya yung may accounts payable, yes. Kasi, siya yung dapat nagbayad. Pero ngayon, ang nagbayad si buyer. So, ang mangyayari, pwedeng gawin natin yung offset na lang yung payable, magdi-decrease yung accounts payable ni buyer, then magdi-decrease din yung accounts receivable ni seller. Okay? When it comes to transportation cost. So, FOB destination naman, freight prepaid for the number 4. FOB destination meaning si seller pa rin yung owner ng product, siya yung liable with the transportation cost. Freight prepaid, ibig sabihin, si seller yung nagbayad ng transportation cost. Siya yung liable, siya rin yung nagbayad sa common carrier. So, meaning, walang entry kay buyer for the transportation cost. But kay seller, ang maging entry niya, debit freight out, kasi siya yung liable eh. So, expense sa point of view ni seller. Then, sino yung nagbayad? Si seller. So, may credit tayong cash kay seller. Si buyer, hindi siya yung liable at hindi rin siya yung nagbayad, so walang entry tayong gagawin. So, meaning, sa accounts payable ni buyer, no effect. Sa accounts receivable ni seller, no effect din. So, okay? So, sige, punta tayo sa illustration. So, dito, the buyer enterprise purchase. So, malinaw naman, diba? The buyer enterprise purchase 200,000 worth of merchandise. So, ito yung halaga or yung gross purchases natin, 200,000. Then, binili yung seller company, diba? So, with the terms 2/10 and over 30. So, disregard muna natin to. Okay? So, ang pag-usapan muna natin dito yung transportation cost. Carrier transported the products and collected 10,000 as transportation fee. So, ang pag-uusapan natin dito, yung 10,000, paano natin siya i-account. Okay? So, we have point of view of buyer at point of view ni seller. Doon muna tayo sa number 1. FOB shipping point. Freight collect. Pag sinabi again, FOB shipping point, si buyer ang liable, freight collect, si buyer ang nagbayad. Okay? So, ang entry natin para kay buyer, debit purchases, credit accounts payable, 200,000. Kay seller, debit accounts receivable, makaka-receive siya, diba? Then, credit sales, 200,000. Para sa letter B, it talks about the transportation cost. Again, sino liable? Si buyer. So, may freight in. Sino nagbayad? Si buyer din. So, may cash na credit kay buyer. So, ayang entry natin, debit freight in, credit cash, 10,000. Kay seller, no entry tayo kasi hindi siya yung liable, hindi rin siya yung nagbayad dun sa common carrier. Okay? For number 2, same illustration but different term, credit term. So, dito, FOB destination, freight prepaid. FOB destination, the seller is liable to the transport with the transportation cost. Freight prepaid, sino nagbayad? Si seller. Okay? So, meaning, hindi liable si buyer, hindi rin siya nagbayad, no entry for the buyer. So, letter A, same entry tayo with letter A. Ang magbabago lang yung letter B. Kay buyer, no entry tayo as I explained earlier. Kay seller, para sa letter B natin na entry, may debit tayong freight out kasi seller yung liable diba? Freight out tayo din, expense sa kanya. And credit cash kay seller because he made the actual payment to the common carrier. Okay? Number 3, FOB shipping point, freight prepaid. So, si buyer, yung liable, but who actually paid? Si seller. Okay? So, for the letter A, same entry pa rin. Para sa letter B, ayan ay magiging entry natin. Since si buyer ang liable sa product, sa transportation cost din, magde-debit tayo ng freight in. Then, pansin nyo dito, anong kinredit natin? Kinredit natin yung accounts payable. Bakit? Sino muna yung nagbayad for him? Or for the buyer? Si seller. So, kay seller, may credit ng cash. So, dapat bayaran ni buyer si seller dun sa transportation cost na inabonohan muna ni seller. Kaya, may accounts payable tayong kinredit kay buyer. So, since may marireceive si seller kay buyer, may debit tayong accounts receivable. Okay? So, for our entry, debit freight in, 10,000 para kay buyer and credit accounts payable, 10,000. Para naman kay seller, with debit accounts receivable, 10,000 and credit cash, 10,000. Okay? Or for the last example, FOB destination freight collect. Same entry again for the letter A. Sa letter B, ito ang magiging entry natin. Tingnan nyo anong mangyayari. So, dito, ang mangyayari, pwedeng correction lang doon sa in-explain ko kanina. So, para kay buyer, pwedeng ang gawin na lang natin, mag-offsetting tayo. Kasi 'di ba pag sinabi FOB destination, si seller ang liable dun sa transportation cost. Freight collect, sino nagbayad? Si buyer. Buyer actually paid the transportation cost where in fact, dapat ang magbayad si seller. Okay? So, pansin nyo dito yung freight out na kay seller kasi siya yung liable. So, dapat lang may na-debit tayo sa kanya. But who actually paid? Si buyer. Kaya may credit tayong cash kay buyer. Yung dito, kaya tayo nag-debit na accounts payable, nag-credit na accounts receivable. Anong nangyari? Parang in-offsetting na lang. Kasi parang, syempre, di ba may payable si buyer kay seller? Ang sabi ni buyer, o sige, ako na lang yung magbayad ng transportation cost para sa'yo. Bawas mo na lang sa payable ko sa'yo. So, mangyayari kay buyer, babawasan yung payable. Kay seller, babawasan yung receivable niya supposedly for the buyer. Kaya ang entry natin dyan para kay buyer, debit accounts payable, 10,000, credit cash, 10,000. And para naman kay seller, debit freight out, and credit accounts receivable, 10,000. Okay? So, just a review lang pag yung freight in, ginagamit natin yan kapag FOB shipping point. The owner is liable to the transportation cost of the product. Kapag freight out, the seller is liable to the with the transportation cost of the product. Okay, freight collect, si buyer ang nagbayad, si freight prepaid, the seller actually remitted the payment. Okay, so that's it for our transportation costs.